Namaskara, good evening, and welcome to today's BIC Streams session, an offering of song, revisioning Tagore's Gitanjali. Rabindranth Tagore's profound meditation on life, nature, grace, and brokenness in the Gitanjali won him the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. Even today, every Indian child learns where the mind is without fear, his lyrical plea for freedom of thought and being. Alternately, a poet and a philosopher, his words remain a part of our intellectual and artistic landscape long after his death 80 years ago. Today's conversation between poet, translator, and writer Priya Sarukkai Chabria and translator and author Arshia Sattar is located in Priya's contemplative and courageous new collection, Sing of Life, revisioning Tagore's Gitanjali, which chisels his prose poems into intense new poems. In the midst of a pandemic, we are invited through this book to re engage with Tagore's prescient ideas on translation and his views on nature, death, and suffering. Priya and Arshia will explore the ways in which this work of Tagore remains relevant to the 21st century, even as he points backwards to the long and diverse tradition of spiritual poetry in the South Asian subcontinent. The full bios of both the speakers will appear in the chat box, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Through the session, please feel free to post any questions, comments, or observations in the Q&A box, which is next to the chat box, also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And with that, over to Arshia.
Hello, Lekha. Thank you for that. Hello, Priya. Lekha, it's also really nice to see you in the BIC library. It's a very appropriate setting for this conversation. I will insist on calling it a conversation because Priya and I are very, very, very old friends. We follow each other's work. We talk a lot about our work. We talk about other people's work. So this is going to be, I hope, rather more informal, rather than let's look at this book, blah, blah. And it's going to be, I hope, freewheeling, even though we have done our homework. We're not going to be entirely idiosyncratic in our comments. But hello, dear Priya. At least I get to see you on screen, even though currently we are both in the same city. Congratulations on yet another fantastic book.
Thank you so much, Arshia.
And honestly, like so many other people, are like, oh God, Tagore, partly because of the way he was, we received Tagore in school.
Yeah.
And partly because as one is in one's youth, one tends to dismiss the romantic and what one sees as sentimental. But this book has, it's, I'm the right age to appreciate Tagore, but I'm always at the right age to appreciate what you do with poetry. So this book is called Sing of Life, Revisioning Tagore's Gitanjali, and it's been called Courageous and Daring. I think I've even seen the word experimental somewhere. But basically what Priya does in the book, and I hope that you will all have a chance to actually, hold the book in your hands, because it is an absolutely beautiful book, physically and emotionally. And for those thusly inclined, spiritually beautiful as well. So what Priya does is she takes the songs, Tagore's songs in Gitanjali. And I find this also very interesting that she constantly refers to them as songs rather than poems, right? Which we can talk about a little later. But she responds to them as a contemporary poet, and I think very much as a contemporary woman poet. I think that's very important. I think there's also another adjective that we can meaningfully use in that sentence, which is a contemporary Indian woman poet. I think she has a profoundly Indian response to Tagore's work. And she responds to the poem, the songs, in a most unexpected and intriguing way. She pulls out of each song Tagore's words. She uses his own words to talk back to him. So it's like an echo. It really is like an echo, because you know when you shout across the mountain, hello, only oh comes back, right? So it's a
Yeah.
beautiful, beautifully resonant, echoing, rich conversation with Tagore. So I urge you all to get a hold of it. It also, what we will be sharing a lot of the songs with you in this conversation, but what we will not be able to share with you is how the book looks, or how the poems look on the page, because Priya's done some very interesting things with that as well. And you know, I mean, the way a poem is laid out, the way it is punctuated or not punctuated, all of that adds to meaning and to significance and what a reader might find in there. So, you know, it's not a book only for listening. It is a book for very, very much for reading yourself, or reading with a beloved, or as Priya did to discover Gitanjali. Am I right? So I've said enough by way of introduction, but you tell us how you came upon Gitanjali recently, the book and the context for that, the physical context, and also I think the emotional context. So.
Yes. Well, first of all, Arshia, it's such a pleasure, such a pleasure. More than that, I'm delighted. Does that kind of quite spell it out, how happy I am to have you on this side? You know, the others, because it's so long since we've had a conversation, and we're doing it now in this way. So I'm very glad that the book has got us together. I'm also glad, happy for that BIC, the Bangalore Little Theatre, Bangalore, and my publishers. Karthika, VK Karthika was absolutely fantastic as an editor. But before I start, Arshia, I have to thank, all the people we don't know and all the people we don't see when we speak of a book like this, because those are the packers, the printers, the couriers, the drivers who actually got this book into bookshops during the last pandemic. So my big thanks goes out to them as well. And how did this happen, this book happen, you asked? Well, actually, almost by accident, by coincidence. My husband and I, Suresh and I, were holidaying in Bir, which is the paragliding center of India. It's also a center of Buddhist studies. And we were doing neither. We were just in a little cafe having coffee, and the coffee was taking very long to come by. So how these mountain cafes often have little bookshelves. And Suresh picked out the Gitanjali and he started reading it and said, "Oh, you might be interested." And I peered over his shoulder because, like you, in school we'd been taught where the mind is without fear, and the whole institution of Tagore, which grows up around him after that, as you grow up, makes him a rather formidable figure. So I'd more or less stayed away, except of course seeing film adaptations. But here we were in this cafe with a little stray dog which came and curled up at our feet, and we were turning the pages, and my God, I was immediately pulled into it, and immediately it was like, certain phrases from the book just lifted off. And I had to have this book. So we asked the cafe owner, who'd never seen us before, he said, "Please, can we borrow this book and get back to you?" And he very kindly said, "Yes, Abba's Cafe in Bir." So we took it along, had it photocopied, and then I began working on it. And it was also, I think, the being in the mountains with these snow peaks around, and the air so clear and sparkling, as it were, that whole setting and the peace of the place we were staying at, which was a place called Colonel's Resort. I mean, very calm, very settling. Um, it's a little like Sangam House used to be when I was there last, very conducive to work, to writing, to contemplation. And so I began working on this book. It was happened quickly, and this is my quickest book, shall we say, because I finished it in less than 2 years. My other projects take 12, 8, 5. Some I don't think I'll ever finish. But this one, yes, it was quite quickly done.
But did you find the form immediately? Or was it your first iteration as a response, what you've done with? Actually, you know what, Priya, let's do a song together. Yeah, okay. So people understand what you've done. And then my previous question will actually have an anchor. It'll have, people can understand it for themselves, right? So we decided, since, everybody knows the poem Where the Mind is Without Fear, we thought we'd start with that.
Yes, yes.
And when you hear it, I'm sure that all of you will be quite taken aback by how relevant it is today, 100 and nearly 10 years after it was written, which is not a particularly bright commentary on our times, but there you have it. So,
so Arshia, will you read Tagore's version?
Sure. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Yeah, what is your version?
Yes, I read this, and immediately you know that this is, shall I say, a poem of secularized spirituality. There is the figure of God, the Father, which comes from his Brahmo Samaj, but basically it is a call for freedom. And what I do with all the poems here is I make 2 poems out of one of his prose poems. So my first poem on Where the Mind is Without Fear is just 1 line, and it is, into freedom, let my country awake. And the second is, may the mind be without fear, knowledge be free, world not broken, words come from truth, reason not lose its way, mind be led into ever-widening thought and action.
That is so lovely.
It speaks to us today, doesn't it?
Yeah, it speaks in our voice, in our language, in our idiom, in our rhythm, in a way that I think another reason why so many of us have stayed away from Tagore for so long is because he feels archaic. And what you have done is you've really reanimated him. You've given him a freshness and an urgency. I think that's what I loved most about these songs, that in your hands, they are in your heart and in your mind, they have become urgent. They have become pleas that are obvious. They have become tributes. They have become celebrations. All of those things.
I am, so, I'll be tipping back and falling on the paws.
Now. Okay, so we've got a sense of what you're doing, right? With the songs as you found them. And so I go back to the question I asked just before we read this most famous of all his songs. You said that you wrote this book very quickly by your standards, which is So I'm wondering if this form, if this eliciting of the essence, this finding the rasa, being the perfect Sahridaya, did that come immediately, or did you have to do a couple or more iterations before you were satisfied with what you had?
I think the basic look of the poem, I don't want to call it structure really, because that seems very deliberate. And I think mine was more intuited. So I think, it's like the content summoning the form. I think that came when I began to write. What one does when one polishes it, of course, is, cut out a few more words or stuff like the usual process. But I think all of it virtually came as it was when I wrote it. I'd read the poem, Tagore's prose poem, and underline the words or circle them, and then transcribe them. And that went on and on. And then, of course, on the second reading, you just cut off a few. And what happened was that, I thought I'd done all the 103 poems of Tagore. And then I wanted to read his book again. So I went back to the Gitanjali. And I found other poems swimming inside the words I hadn't, used. And there they were, a different version of which sometimes said different things, gave it another hue, another weight, or to the first section I had done, the first poem I had done. So I again went through all this, 103, and then put them together. And I must say that I was happy that it worked out this way.
Yeah.
So 2 pages,
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the content of this poem, because I think it will sort of set the parameters for the other things that we're going to discuss, through the hour. And I've been very struck on rereading the poem, which again I must thank you for, the fact that I reread it at all with some amount of concentration rather than as, oh, this cliche, I know it. I find it very, very interesting that he places reason and faith together, not as polar opposites, but two things that can exist hand in hand. And when they do, then we have the chance to be free and to be fulfilled. So I wanted to ask you about how you feel about that. And what do you think he's asking for freedom from? What must we be free of to be complete human beings?
Yeah, this is, in the original, I think he called this Prathana Prayer. And it is, of course, a prayer, but what is he praying for? He is praying for the country, right? And
we can do that now too, pray for the same.
Absolutely. And that is why I think this immediately resonates, because here we are again speaking about moral choices, about freedom, and not losing faith, keeping the faith and keeping reason on par, as it were. Because I think this partially comes out of his Brahmo background, where you have faith and you have social work, you have the call to reason, you have his reading of the Enlightenment, the philosophers of the Enlightenment. You have all that background, but you also have his mind. And he has this esemplastic imagination. It pulls things together. It sees patterns. It sees unities. So he does not see a clash or a contradiction between holding these two together.
Right.
And I think that's what happens when you intuit something. You don't see the clashes, it just comes together. I'm sure it happened to you when you were writing the Ramayana, for example, rewriting the Ramayana. We should call
Translating. Please don't say I rewrote it. Somebody will come
No.
my head.
I take it back then. Okay, yes. your iconic translation of the Ramayana.
No, of course, I think that when you enter a text deeply, and that you must, when you're going to translate something, something is transformed, and you work instinctively rather than always leading with the mind. And yet, when you're translating, nothing is a better friend to you than reason. You know, like you have to stay rational in your choices, in your eliciting again, you know, of what the text is really saying. So I do have and yet you have to surrender to the book. You have to surrender to Ramayana. You have to surrender to Tagore. So that is always that act of faith, you know, that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. And the book is going to lead me, the other voice is going to lead me to what is true. Not the truth, but what is true in this text. So what, you know, Tagore, I was surprised that there were so many poems about death in this collection. Right. And I think that, you know, this thing of what do we want freedom from, or what fears do we need to be free of to live fully? I think one of the things is the fear of death, you know, which God knows we all have, whether we acknowledge it or not. And certainly we see it as we grow older. We know that, oh, I'm not afraid of death. No, but you're not afraid of death, but you know that it is the unknowable, right? So I find it sort of, I find this collection, you know, compelling in many ways, because it is simultaneously life affirming and death affirming. It's not death denying, right, in any way. So
right. Let's you know, it's important to place the Gitanjali in Tagore's life. And he came to this, he put together this collection after the death of his father, his wife, his dearly beloved daughter, Renuka, his son. So he was facing death, grief, sorrow all the time. That on the one hand, and then of course the wisdom traditions that he comes from, the Upanishadic, the Bhakti, the Vaul, you know, all these traditions. And he is a man of remarkable courage that comes through. He doesn't agree, just to detract for a moment, he doesn't agree with everyone on patriotism, for instance, you know, and nationalism. And people were criticizing him for, shall we say, having doubts about it. But he held on because he was prescient about this, that nationalism could lead to a kind of a chauvinistic authoritarianism.
Guess where we are today? Oh my goodness.
Yes, there he was, you know. So that mind of his, which was looking at everything very sharply, clearly, I think he saw then death as a friend, as the beloved. He calls him the bridegroom. You know, again and again, because life, of course, doesn't end with life. It ends with death, and again, something else. It isn't. So there is this fierce, shall I say, fierce hope, fierce love of life. As he says, because I love life, I will love death as well, which I thought was profound and marvelous. If only we could also, you know, have that same freedom from death and from fear. So why don't we read? You know, because, but one point before we get into another reading is the idea of detachment, which we, you know, because you think the moment you think of death, you think that the person is an ascetic of some sort, renounce the world. And of course, he hasn't done any of this, anything of that sort, because also he says it. And you know that in this subcontinental, the Indic tradition, the sacred and the secular the sacred and the sensuous, the carnal and the sensuous are not separate. They are
But at
together, and
the
he's moving
time,
from there.
in the South Asian spiritual traditions, we are persuaded towards detachment and to giving up the pleasures of the senses. And God bless Tagore. He's advocating something really quite different. And I know we're going to read one of those songs, but shall we do the death one first?
Certainly, we could do the death one first. That would be, I think we'll take song 92.
92?
Yeah. Could you also, once again, Arshia, could you please read this first?
Yes, with pleasure. So we're going to do this for probably the first half of this session. I'm going to read the Tagore, and Priya is going to read her work, just so that you all have a fuller sense of what she's actually done and why it is as precious as it is. But as we progress into the session, you'll be hearing less of me reading. Okay, so this is Psalm 92. I know that the day will come when my sight of this earth shall be lost, and life will take its leave in silence, drawing the last curtain over my eyes. Yet stars will watch at night, and morning rises before, and hours heave like sea waves, casting up pleasures and pains. When I think of this end of my moments, the barrier of the moments breaks, and I see by the light of death thy world with its careless treasures. Rare is its lowliest seat, rare is its meanest of lives. Things that I have longed for in vain, and things that I got, let them pass. Let me but truly possess the things I have ever spurned and overlooked. What a strange, strange poem.
Indeed.
Okay. Make it real, Priya. Tell us what you did.
Mine is, I think, starker, more austere. But so let me read it first. My sight shall be lost. Life will draw the curtain over my eyes. Yet stars will watch and morning rise and hours heave like sea waves. When I think of this end, the barrier of moments breaks. I see the world with its careless treasures. Rare is its lowliest seat, rare its meanest life. Things I longed for and things I got, let them pass. Let me possess the things I spurned. I see by the light of death.
That is a truly amazing line. I see by the light of death. Yeah. Because, we're all we're tutored into thinking that death is darkness. And yet, anybody who has a near-death experience always speaks of going towards the light, So
yes.
Yeah,
That is, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I was wondering, where does he get this equanimity, shall we say, or the strange insight into seeing by the light of death? Of course, the death of his all the people who were dear to him who have passed, but also I think it comes from a decentering of one's life, of oneself from life, not putting yourself right up there in the middle. But when you decenter, I think there's a great comfort which he finds. And I think anyone, when we do that too, we find this, the comfort of knowing that life continues, that the stars will shine, and the morning will rise, that kind of continuity, because you're seeing yourself in so many things, though your body will go, and with it, all that you think is you. And
can I just pick up on this decentering?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah, sure.
it's leading me to something else that I want to talk to you about. This, we are told, or the sort of consensus discourse right now is that we are in the Anthropocene, that this is the
Yes.
age of the human, right? And I think it's precisely because as a race, we have never decentered ourselves, that we have come to this crisis.
Very true.
This planetary crisis, it's not simply about the pandemic or about global warming. The planet and is in crisis, and we, as a consequence, are in existential crisis as individuals and as a species. So people now, there are these new discourses forming, ecosophy, which is a combination, I guess, of like ecology and philosophy, but more relevant to your work and to our conversation, eco-poetics, right? And I would really like to hear what you think about the idea of eco-poetics, and is it like or unlike what we used to call nature poetry, when we were studying literature? Wordsworth is a nature poet. We didn't say he's an eco-poet. Is there a difference? And so is there a difference between the two? And if there is, then are they connected? Or is eco-poetics just some very posh 21st century way to say I like nature? It makes meaning for me.
Yeah, the nature poets, I think, didn't see the world as threatened, right? Most of them, or they were arguing. Some of them were, of course, Walden does say there was a movement against industrialization and materialism. It had already started, but the world was very much more or less what it was at that time. Now, when we talk about the Anthropocene and what we have done, we're talking about, of course, climate breakdown. We're talking about wildfires in Siberia. We're talking about pathogens from the time of the dinosaurs creeping up on us next. We're talking about tremendous shock, aren't we? And so there is a shift from what we call the nature poets. But let's remember, nature poetry is as old as humankind. And of course, because I think of Sangam poetics, Tamar Sangam poetics, where the inner and the outer landscapes were combined through metonym. The inner stood for the outer and the outer stood for the inner. Then you have in Sanskrit and Prakrit, the various Prakrits, you have the idea of the 6 seasons. You have Kalidasa's Ritu Samharam, most famously. You have the haiku.
Of course.
And those takes on, and the Chinese Book of Songs. From every part of the world, we've had the songs of nature, because I think we really cannot live without it. And I think that has come to us very concretely, and in the time of the pandemic, because as we are shut in, that little glimpse of sky, that bit of a flowering tree that we see, it so lightens up our lives. And I think we're looking at each flower, the turn of the seasons much deeper. And eco-poetics, the poets there we're also reading the science. So we're reading and we're writing about the things we don't see. The roots talking to each other. For instance, so science is feeding in there. And I think that makes it a very significant contribution to poetry. So, and also, with the digital age, you can do much more with the page on when you have a website. So all that too comes in. So
Do you
yes, there
think
is a difference.
Tagore is an eco-poet or is he an old-fashioned nature poet?
Pardon, I'm sorry?
Do you think Tagore is an
Tagore.
eco-poet? Or let me put it this way, because I want
Not
you
an
to,
eco. Huh.
yeah, I want you to read another song as well. Have you taken a nature poet and turned him into an eco-poet with your response to? Do you want to read us? I know you had a poem in mind for.
Sure.
Yeah.
Shall we then? I think maybe I go to song 69.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
because there you see what Tagore is doing. There is no disconnect in him. We were talking of decentering earlier, decentering the ego, as it were, you know, pushing it away. And here you see Tagore. I think of Tagore on his houseboat, going down the Padma River, this luxurious houseboat, and its life is unscrolling on either side of him. And it gives a certain rhythm, it gives a certain calmness to the mind, I think.
He was a rich man, let's not forget that. He was a rich guy.
Yeah, very. I mean, that was, when he was doing that, I think he could write, therefore he could write a line like about the centuries that time takes to, open a flower, make a flower, which is very beautiful.
Let's read that one.
Yeah. I'm going to read 69, which I think is one of his strongest, but there's so many, really, poems on nature, 69. And this is also, what happens is that when I was reading Tagore, his rapture, all those years ago, a century ago, his rapture comes pushing through the page into you, and you begin to glow with that rapture and gratitude. And I think
so does your rapture come pushing through the page, let me tell you, and everybody else who's listening. So yeah.
Thank you. So this is 69, and I'll read my version. The same stream of life that runs through my veins runs through the world. The same life that shoots through dust and blades of grass and breaks into leaves and flowers. The same life is rocked in the ocean cradle of birth and death. My limbs are made glorious by its touch. My pride is a life throb dancing. The same life, the same life, the same life in my blood. Isn't
Really
that?
Yeah. But I love what you've done with it, the same life, the same life, the same life, because he obviously is not quite so tightly repetitive in Tagore's work.
I think he used it 4 times, and each time I kind of picked it out and put it together, So, so you were saying.
So I, I learned this new word from you over this last week when we've been talking about the session and preparing for it. Hylozoism, which means that all matter is animate. Yeah, so the roots are talking to each other, and the leaf has feelings, and the tomato cries when you pluck it, and whatever. I mean, but it's a very it's very complex and sort of paradigm changing understanding of the world, right? And it led me to think immediately, given my background, of pantheism, which of course is completely different because it means everything in the world is divine, which is different from all matter is animate, right? I'm wondering if you want to comment on that in terms of Tagore. Is he pantheistic, or is he helozoist, or does it matter at all?
Well, I think from where we're talking, I don't think it really matters. I mean, because I think Tagore is a person who's, people are always trying to put labels on him because he is such a profound thinker. So he's the Oriental to the Westerners, etc. You know, and then he becomes Guru Dev and he can't be touched and all that. But it is vitally important to think of, I think, of all life, all matter as animate. And the moment you start doing that, you have a possibility to move away from the Anthropocene. You have a way to a way of thinking, ethical thinking, and responsibility to the other than human or the more than human.
Absolutely.
You know, and I found it gives me a wonderful understanding of time, which I hadn't thought of earlier. The time of the tree, the life of the tree, the slow life, the slow time, the time of the snail, the time of the whale, I mean, living 200 years or so. How does time move through these bodies? You know, it gets one thinking, and I think this is what Tagore does. Being this pantheistic or nature poet, he feels deeply. And let's remember, and this is also from, I think it's in all the epics and all the classical traditions, and I've read your translation of the Valmiki how many years ago. And and it stays with me. But there you have, even in Bhakti poetry, everyone talks to the birds.
Oh God,
You know, and they talk back. And I think it is also, without sounding soft-headed, I think it is a way of listening, a way of observing. And then you see how things talk back. I think there is this, there are multiple universes as it is around us.
Well, you know, we all did this as children, no, Priya. For a child, all matters animate. And, you know, you talk to your desk and you talk to your pencil and you talk to the bird. And all these people, creatures, entities are talking back to you. It is a world of constant interaction. You know? And the hierarchy of animation comes only as adults, you know. We've all forgotten what it was like to understand what birds said back to us, you know.
That's beautiful.
Like his father was so special because he remembered.
And that is what I found in your translation of the Ramayana. And I'd like you to speak about nature in the Ramayana. Come on.
No. This is about your book, not mine.
Yeah, but tell me a little. Tell us all. Because it's so beautiful in the Aranyakanda, and he's wandering. And
and he sees his beloved everywhere, in every tree, in every flower, in every little animal. He says, beautiful little deer, see, your eyes are like my beloved's. Have you seen her? Oh, Bilva tree, my beloved's lips are the color of your fruit. You must have seen her, you know, and this sort of sharing of human characteristics with you know, with nature, or seeing that there is our primary descriptions in Valmiki are from nature. No, that her lips were bilva color, her eyes were like a deer. Not like, you know, her eyes were like somebody else's eyes. No, I mean, you know, they go back to perhaps to perhaps like a really atavistic memory, or an atavistic sort of cultural community, something. And I think one of the reasons why Valmiki, like Tagore, is so powerful, precisely because of these nature descriptions, which we have become separated from. So they really hit us like a ton of bricks. Because it's like, wow, man, this I forgot, or this I never saw, or this I didn't know. There's a number of ways to parse our disconnection from what should be our primary origin, as it were. From dust we come, to dust we shall go. But I want to take this a little further, because Tagore is sounding more and more like a bhakti poet.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if you bhaktified him, because you worked so beautifully on bhakti already, with your Andal book, which remains, probably my favorite of all your books. Now this Tagore one is, nudging it a bit. But, and Andal, of course, is a woman poet. She's not even a woman, she's a girl. And I think that's very important in the construction of Andal. That she's a girl, she's prepubescent, and by the time she's 16, she's apotheosed into the goddess, right? But and she is profoundly a saguna bhakti poet. She worships, she loves God in his form. That is very important, right? And we can suggest that perhaps Tagore is a nirguna bhakti poet, right? So now you've done your saguna bit, now you've done your nirguna bit. And also, I do think, Andal was what, 5-7 years ago from you? And I don't want to, sort of get too personal in a public space, but I do think that this is part of your journey. This is your spiritual arc as well. From the profoundly saguna, from the profoundly sensual, to somebody like Tagore, who incorporates the sensuality into his formlessness. End of sentence. Yeah.
Yes, yes, of course. Andal is all of 15 when she's asking Krishna to enter her, possess her. It's tremendously carnal and tremendously spiritual. That's what she does, right? And when I was doing Andal, I think I was stunned by the nakedness of her core, the vulnerability she put herself up in. And you knew that this girl didn't give a damn about anything except poetry. She's very clear that she followed the poetic rules, nothing else. And she was putting herself out. But in Andal and now in Tagore, what happens is that the poem is like it's compacted. It's not a jack in the box, but it just is. There's so much, shall I say, energy coming out of it. This huge spill. And I did feel, maybe that is a part of what has stayed with me, working with Andal. I was in this presence, as it were, of a very intelligent mind, poetically, in terms of insight, in terms of spirituality. There was this magnificent intelligence one was working with. So one's energy also had to lift up, to somewhere meet that. And I think that's part of the reason why maybe the Andal book is resonant, because it takes some of that energy and shares it out, So yes, there was that. And then Tagore, as sudden as Andal came to me, one day I remember I told my mother, Mom, I'm translating Andal, without knowing a word of classical Tamil. And of course, she said, oh, here are the scholars you should meet, etc., etc. And Tagore happened the same way. So what has happened in the meanwhile? Here it is, sorry. It's when you immerse yourself, and I don't like the word immerse yourself in a book, because then I feel like a submersible going into something and then coming out intact. No. when you get into a text like that, you dissolve. In some way, you've dissolved yourself into it. And and your whole consciousness has been reconstituted, right? And then you emerge, and it is this new reconstituted consciousness, shall I say, and voice with which you're speaking. So you're transformed, as has happened with you with Ramayana. You know, your life is changed because of that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course it has. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you. I don't like this emotion thing. You know,
Mm.
it makes me feel like Visarjan, like an idol. You know, even though there is dissolution, right? But then you come back enriched by what you
Yes,
have been able to
absolutely.
absorb, you know, in that process of dissolving or joining or merging or any of that. But you know, I mean, time is tempest fugit. So I want you to read, please, Priya, one song that will show us what you and I are so secure in, that Tagore really is a bhakti poet and a nirguna bhakti poet. And then I think we're going to have to ask. Not we're going to have to, but we would like to ask other people to join this conversation. So will you give us a Nirguna favorite? Yeah.
Yes, I will. I mean, I do think that he is, you know, I wouldn't just put him as Nirguna though. I think it's Saguna and Nirguna together. I think there is this movement, just like, you know, when we speak about words and poetry, literature, we're trying to reach, at least we who translate bhakti and poetry, many of us actually, right, want to reach a silence, right? A sacred, full, energized silence. And I think the movement is like that. From the Nirgun, the beauteous, we get into a greater beauty. Before I read this wonderful, one of my favorite poems in the book, I just want to say one thing about beauty. You know, all the religions are very good at using the idea of beauty. All the gods are beauteous. They're stained glass cathedrals. They're the Utsamurtis. They're these wonderful large domes. But I think there is, again, a woman in the 11th century, a Japanese court lady, Shonagon of the famous pillow books. And she put it rather neatly. Said, priests should be handsome so that they hold your attention. I just love that. And there she was. And that tells you the idea of the summons of beauty. And love is beautiful. This vast love that he speaks about, which is there, I think it's makes one dissolve, right? So here, I mean, it is possibly the most beautiful thing you can experience. So here is 59. There is nothing but love. This light, these clouds, this breeze on my forehead, light floods my eyes, bends from above, looks down on my eyes. This is your message. This is your message.
You've also made the poems incantatory, which makes them more prayerful. At least for our ears, this is a yeah, it's an easier incantation to respond to. So yeah.
I think,
Okay.
well,
Sorry.
just
Please.
1 second. I think that
Yes.
is part of the arc, which you were
Yeah.
speaking
Yeah.
of
Yeah. Yeah.
earlier,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just happening. I think it's happening. A part of it is age, and part of it is, of course, the literature you're reading. And good fortune and having great friends who are walking along the same path.
True, true, true.
You know?
So let us make some new friends now, Priya.
Yeah.
And Lekha, may I ask you to help us with any questions or comments that might have come in?
Sudeep Ghosh says there is a conscious design in your retelling, be it the placement of words, creating a visual landscape, or the repetition of key phrases, evoking an incantatory music. How did you work out this design? What kind of inner sublime ritual was at work?
That's a great question, Priya.
That's a great question and a difficult one, because my answer is very rather simple. I knew what I didn't want to do was add my own words. That was it. This is a homage. It's a tribute. So I didn't want to, put myself in there. And the other thing I didn't want to do is change Tagore's pattern of words. So I took his words, chose the words in the order that they were from, and I put them together. And I think that may possibly give it its intensity. What can I say? I mean, it's so difficult to say why you've done something, after a point. I think it is, but thank you for your question and your very kind words. Really, it is intuition, because just the rapture, the joy that is there, the joy of creation, I think came out to me. And also, I think this book made me in many ways remember the elements in a way that I hadn't or I'd forgotten, which I think has some bearing on the book. I mean, for example, when I began the book, I was, as I said, in this surrounded by mountains, and we'd have this bonfire in the night. And you know what happens when you sit around a bonfire? Fire is no longer a commodity which you switch on and switch off to cook. It is a primal being. It carries mystery and power, and it mesmerizes you. And from that fire, you look straight up at the stars, and you see the wonder of all these stars out there so clear. Just the idea of, just the fact of seeing these stars. I think this kind of elemental connection worked to possibly cut out the embroidery. That is what I did. I cut out all the dreary days of, cut out the embroidery and get to the elemental.
I think the thing that you said about stars is really important, because the one thing that we have completely lost in our city living, who sees the stars anymore? You see one, oh, that's Venus, how exciting. But if you go out into the country, you can see the Milky Way. This is important for us to remember how tiny and insignificant we are.
Exactly.
The Anthropocene has, is a consequence of our hubris, really.
Yes, and talking about that, I would like to read, one poem which I think reflects very much his idea of waste, Tagore's idea of, at least this is the way I interpret it, and it would be, this is the song where he meets the young woman on the way to he has this conversation with a young woman. Where is it now? Yeah, sorry. It's not 96, it's 64. Pardon me.
Oh, yeah. My favorite poem. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it reflects directly on this, at least the way I interpret it. 64. On the river, among tall grass, I ask, where do you go, shading your lamp? My house is dark. I float my lamp on a stream. I watch her lamp drift in the tide. In the silence of the night, I ask, your lights are lit. Where do you go with your lamp? I dedicate my lamp to the sky. I watch light burning in the void. In moonless midnight, I ask, what is your quest? I bought my lamp to join the caravan of lamps. I watch her lamp lost among other lights. Look at my face through the dusk. This, it's to me, brings the moment, as I said, because you don't turn the light where it is needed. You're not pulling the resource where it is needed. It's waste upon waste upon waste upon waste. And habit, consumerism, is the way I read it. I don't know how you read this poem.
I thought I read it very much as all lights join other lights, that it's a form of hope and community and collective brightness. Yeah. Anyway, shall we take the next question, please, Lekha?
Shabnam Mirchandani, while inhabiting one language and crossing over into another with syntactic and timbral mimesis in mind, I think you consciously engage in a kind of ontological activism. Asks you to share your thoughts about this.
Right. I haven't read the Bengali Gitanjali. I haven't read the poems in the Bengali that went into making the Gitanjali. I have gone into the English Gitanjali. And it's from here that it has evolved. And so I think since I have answered part of this question earlier, I would like to leave it at that here, if that's okay. Or Arshia, do you have anything to add?
A bit, I love the phrase ontological activism. I'm trying to figure out how to think about it, but it's certainly a very, very captivating,
striking.
Yeah. And when I was younger, I always thought that I was an existential activist. Now I think in my ripening middle age, I'm going to have to be an ontological activist.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Would you like to expand on it, Shabnam?
Actually, there is an expansion in parent. She says, especially with archaisms that sometimes blur meaning for a modern reader, and also some cliches which are like linguistic pathogens these days. So
pathogens, okay.
Hands here.
That's a marvelous way of putting it, right? Linguistic pathogens. It's pretty scary. Well, let's go to the archaism. Yes, of course, that could have been a stumbling block, because I remember certainly when I was in school, and for many of us, it was this thou, thee kind of terminology, which which made one stumble, which made him so out of reach. But then since I see him as a bhakti poet, I tuned into the bhakti mode. And in the bhakti mode, the address is always intimate. It is personal, it is passionate, it breaks all boundaries, every kind of linguistic, every kind of, I'll just say it breaks all boundaries and leave it to you to imagine all the boundaries it breaks, including that of the self, as it drives on like a lava-driven, a river of lava. So what I did with this thou, thee, and I just threw it out and replaced it because I wanted the intimacy. That was my first, most important need, the intimacy of address. And as for the cliches, yes, of course, I don't know, there are two ways of looking at this. How much of a cliche was it in Tagore's time? Was Tagore using certain cliches, as we call them now, to impress his Western audiences, to tell them that he was familiar with this language? Because remember, he took this book out to the West and he was very keen to have it read and celebrated there in 1912. And three, behind every cliche, there is a truth, which is why it becomes a cliche. So you just have to seek that truth. You just have to find it and pick it up. And there it goes, and it's all fresh again.
There's something so sadly ironic about dropping the thee and the thou, because in Middle English, that is the tum, the personal, the intimate
Yes.
mode of addressing the other. And just because it's our English has lost that, we have
Yes,
one
absolutely.
you that is very intimate and, very formal. And so many other languages, certainly German, hangs on to the z and
Yes,
the you.
true.
And it's, yeah. I've always missed that in English, terribly much. Especially as a translator, how do you
Right.
how do you sort of share the intimacy that a simple pronoun evokes, and along with it, of course, the verb and all that. But so we're sort of hitting our cutoff time. So I'm going to use my moderator privilege. Moderator, I mean, there's two of us, but anyway, I'm going to use the privilege that I have at this moment. I'm going to ask you to end the session with a poem that you'd like us to take away with us. But I don't want to speak after Priya has spoken. I think it's very important that we carry her words in her voice. So I'm going to say our goodbyes and thank yous before the poem. Very, very big thank you to Lekha and Raghu, who hold down these BIC sessions with such elan and such good humor. So thank you, Lekha. Thank you, Raghu. And of course, always to the super fabulous BIC, Bangalore International Center. Thank you for hosting us and letting us share our work. So Priya, if you read, and as you end, Lekha, Raghu, we can end the session. Thank you also to everybody who took the time to attend, and thank you especially to the people who sent in questions and compliments.
Thank you. Arshia, I have a request. Could I read two poems in succession? One on art.
It's your show. Read three. Yeah.
And I must thank you too. It's just great to have you here with me on this. So I want to read one poem, which is 101, which is really the art and the artist, since we've been talking about this very often, the creating of art. And what does he say? Tagore, in my version, I have sought you with my songs. With them, I searched and touched the world. They showed me secret paths, stars on the horizon of my heart. To what gate have they brought me at the end? With my songs, I feel about searching, touching. Guide me to the mysteries. This one, and I'll end this wonderful session. Thank you so much, everyone. With 103, Tagore's last prose poem, which more or less, I think, also speaks for me and what I feel about this book, Tagore, and where I am at in life today. 103. In one salutation, let my senses spread out and touch this world. Let my mind bend in one salutation. Let my songs gather and flow into a sea of silence in one salutation. Like a flock of homesick cranes flying back, let my life take to its eternal home in one salutation. like a rain cloud, hung low, shed showers. Let my life take its voyage to you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.